There is a generation that has been deprived of the Sobukwe story. It's bigger than everyone.
Here comes a man. When they asked him the question, is there a place for an Indian in the Pan Africanist? Sobukwe's answer was no, there's no place for an Indian. Neither is there a place for a white man in this country. There's only a place for an African.
Whites were saying we are Europeans and this is non-Europeans. So if you're Africans, let's all be Africans in Africa.
Sign allegiance to your country of birth. If you're born in Africa, you're an African.
There is no race that is stronger than the other race.
Throw your weight around the African majority. Then we accept you as an African.
He believed in Pan Africanism. He was able to influence people more on the issue of the Dom Pass.
Now the pass was a booklet, identity booklet, which a black person, male or female, had to carry 24 hours a day in his pocket. And should the police catch you without that booklet outside your house, 3 to 6 months imprisonment. A black person, male or female, in their country of birth, they were not allowed to move freely from city to city, town to town, unless government grants permission in that booklet. Neither were they not allowed to work or to school wherever they want to.
The past laws at the time were so harsh.
Very few people actually now remember that there was such a horrendous thing as the pass laws. Remember, you had to carry your pass on you at all relevant times. Whether you were in bed, whether you were not, it was required that you carry the pass on your person.
They say a man would run into a burning house, not to save his children, to save the booklet. Because without that booklet outside his house, he means nothing. He can't even take a walk to his workplace, because between his house and his workplace, being caught without the booklet, 3 to 6 months in prison, and it's hard labor. Robert Sobukwe came up with the slogan, first you must overcome the fear of being imprisoned, and you must overcome the fear of the bullet.
Sobukwe was so powerful without him having to carry a weapon.
On the 21st of March 1960, we're going to leave all our Dom passes at home. And we're going to march to the nearest police station and tell the police the law of your country is if a black person will have this booklet in his pocket, he must be arrested. Here we are in front of your police station. Arrest us.
Gathering in front of the police station, it says something. The approach is non-violent, fighting against one of the most powerful laws.
To also remember that Sobukwe was a professor, or a lecturer rather, at Wits University. And on the 21st of March, he decided to give up his job. Leaders in front. Nobody's going to play hide and seek. They followed his call by the thousands countrywide. In fact, they brought the entire country to a standstill.
The ultimate consequence intended was that the police stations would be clogged with all these people presenting themselves for arrest.
In front of the one police station in a town called Sharpeville, not far from Johannesburg. After the police arrested the first 100 without the booklet, when they looked through the window of the police station, there were thousands waiting outside to be arrested without the booklet. Instead, the police came out with their machine guns, and within 5 minutes they gunned down 69 in front of that police station. And we claim it today, the start of the revolution. Now, countrywide that day there were killings. Countrywide that day arrests were made by the thousands. The country was in chaos. The army had to be called in. And for the first time in the history of South Africa, a state of emergency was declared because of Sobukwe. Sobukwe too was arrested. Leaders in front.
Sharpeville caused massive physical, political, and psychological dislocation. Within weeks, they banned the ANC and PAC. That led to both organizations regrouping in exile. It led in 1961 to the Umkhonto weSizwe announcement. The United Nations begins to take note. The development of apartheid as a crime against humanity begins thereafter.
On the 21st of March 1960, which is today, declared the Human Rights Day. And also I have to mention it, that even the United Nations has recognized the 21st of March as International Human Rights Day after Sobukwe. You follow?
Whatever happened on that day, he didn't anticipate it. He only heard about everything that happened in Sharpeville whilst he was in jail.
The approach used by Sobukwe and the PAC that he led was no plea, no bail, no defense. We will not plead because we don't recognize the unjust court. We will not take bail and we will not have defense so that we can again clock the system.
He was given a 3-year sentence, which he first served on the mainland, that's Johannesburg. But when his 3 years were over, 1963, the situation in this country was so explosive. They could not afford Sobukwe's freedom.
On the day of his release, was immediately moved to Robben Island.
And because he already served his sentence on the mainland, they couldn't mix him with the others. They put him in that little house, sole alone. That prison there is only one bedroom and a small section for a kitchen. And then for ablution purposes, they had to go to toilets outside. And the smallest can only accommodate one man. There's nowhere else in the world where only one man was kept in a solitary confinement like Robert Sobukwe.
One morning the commanding officer was calling me and 5 other people to the office and told us that you've been chosen among all these warders to go and work permanently at Sobukwe's house. Those times I wasn't allowed to talk to him, you see. I was never allowed to talk to Sobukwe himself.
Nothing was the same again. You know, in his speech, he imagined South Africa to be free in 3 years from then. 1960, 1963, he was saying a different, South Africa completely. And yet, that is when he was placed, at Robben Island. And everything else changed completely. His life was shattered.
We all know whenever a government gets together, the main purpose and function of any government is to make laws and rules to govern an entire country. But in the case of Sobukwe, the entire government will get together to promulgate one law to govern only one person, that's Sobukwe.
Those years, Sergeant Len Verster was visiting him every morning, and I think once a week the medical Lieutenant Nel was come around and have a look at him. Here in mid-64 they start with the police, with 3 or 4 of them with their dogs. They was patrolling from Alpha 1 down to the harbour. In the first day there was a rule that we have to come inside and see that he was still in his bed and laying there.
Vervoet was Prime Minister then, and it was Foster who was Minister of Justice, Police and Prison. Sobukwe was a political prisoner because they held him on the General Law Amendment Act amended to call the Sobukwe Clause. And it was annually renewed from 64, the first year, right up to 69.
So every year the Parliament had to get together, promulgate a law just for one man, Sobukwe, the mystical man.
Each and every morning when I was working here, he was up early in the morning, and then they brought his food about, say, 7 o'clock, around about that time, 7:15. There was a big rooikans with a top tree, and he was used to sit beneath under the tree.
Well, number one, one must understand he had better facilities than those in the prison itself. He had his own radio. Newspapers were delivered to him. And he also studied correspondence. University College London, he studied through that. So that kept him very, very busy. He was an intellectual to start off. And he was a dedicated scholar of books. The guards too became very good friends of him.
Me and Sobukwe in those years, as you say, I wasn't allowed to talk to him, or he wasn't allowed to talk to me. But I was standing there alone, he was sitting alone, sometimes he wants to talk, and then he comes to the fence and we talk about normal things. There was nothing, you can state what we talked, it was normal about what I was doing, where I was going to school, and my family still living and what they are doing.
Whenever he has enough fruit over, he would come to them, listen, I want to share it with you, and there was sort of a relationship with the guards as well.
You are a young man, you're also hungry, you see. Then he gave me something to eat. I'll never see him cross. So he never showed it to me when he was cross. So.
When the old authorities used to visit Sobukwe to speak him out of this whole thing of Pan Africanism, he was never cross with them. And he greeted them. There's some photographs available where he stood with the high-profile Nationalist Party people. And he greeted them, and they left in peace. His wife and his children visited him on 4 occasions on Robben Island. And his wife slept over also.
He was a family man. He loved his family.
One of those rooms were renovated for the children to sleep in.
Sadly, when he was taken away from his family, is that his kids, all of his kids, were very, very young. When that father is taken away, it destroys one. More especially children. Psychologically, it destroys them. Because at some point, when they were waiting excitedly for his release in May of 1963, from prison, sadly 10 days before that, an announcement was made in Parliament, to detain Sobukwe even further.
We cannot diminish the tragic consequences of that isolation.
The Sobukwe story is very heavy. It's very heavy for me. From time to time, I become very emotional. And I remember there's a time where I couldn't finish the story. That's how heavy the story was that day, that particular moment. And everyone was sobbing. I couldn't continue, with the story. And those who were there understood exactly what was happening.
We don't know of many others who were treated like that in our history.
We're talking about an intellectual who is now silenced.
To deny an intellectual, intellectualizing, engaging with fellow human beings.
You're not allowed to talk to anyone. You're not allowed to engage with anyone. And this is the person that will address the hundreds and thousands of people. And now you are placed in isolation by yourself.
Remember, in the early days, he was not allowed to speak to anybody. They say the 3rd year, when he was eventually visited in there, His vocal cords were affected by not talking.
He mentions to some who were allowed to visit him, that he was beginning to lose his words.
They knew that if you silence Sobukwe, you'll be able to destroy the future. His tongue was the weapon.
They were intending to break him. They were intending to make him lose his point of reference, his centrifugal role.
Hy was 'n normale persoon, soos almal van ons nou is, gesels en daar's niks dat hy jou aanstootsel gegee het om iets te sê wat hy nie wil hoor nie, of dat hy vir jou gevra het om iets te doen vir hom. So, dis hoekom ek hom groot respekteer, dat hy het al die kanse gehad om briewe vir my te gegee het, of iets te gegee het om uit te vat, maar hy het dit nooit gedoen nie. Jy sien, so hy het my gerespekteer vir wat ek gedoen het en ek het vir hom gerespekteer vir dat hy dit nie by 'n versoeking gestel het om dit te doen nie.
Whenever the prisoners used to march past his house to the quarries, a little distant, then what Sobukwe would do, he would walk to the corner of his compound, the fence, bend down, pick up a handful of soil, keep the soil very high in the sky, let it filter to his hand back to the ground again. They will salute him with open palm, and he would return with the open palm. But too distant away to speak to one another. You are all sons of the soil of Africa. Fight until the last African soil is freed.
They knew that they are the sons of the soil. So the only way or method of communication for him was to pick up the sand, let it filter through his fingers. That is to say, we are the sons of the soil from Africa.
Every morning in the prison, when there's a roll count, then they count the prisoners, 770. Then what they would do, on the notice board they would write 770 plus 1. And the prisoners could never understand why 770 plus 1. And then one of the guards said, no, the plus 1 is Sobukwe. The only man in the world that has a number like that. Nobody else. Plus 1 was his mystical number. And he went on for 6 long years. And one day when they came past the notice board, they only noticed the figure 770, whatever the figure may be that time, and not the plus 1. Back to the cells. They always burst into tears. 2 things could have happened. The man died on the island in solitary confinement, or he was released. And then eventually, after a week, one of the guards came to them and said, no, don't worry, Sobukwe was removed from the island. And according to Jeff Masambule, they was jubilant, singing and dancing. Our leader is not dead yet.
And I remember in '66, waiting in May for the banner headlines, the evening paper, to buy the newspaper. And for about 2 years, it was Sobukwe not released, Sobukwe not released. And then in '69, Sobukwe released.
And then he was banished to a small town, central South Africa, called Kimberley. And he was not allowed to leave the boundaries of the town.
He was transferred, to Kimberley, since he knew that I am here for the people.
It's not surprising that after that, his objective was to become a lawyer, and he became a lawyer. Because he could see that there were very few black lawyers at that time.
He knew that I'm placed in this community, I'm going to make this thing work. Exposing him to that space.
And they need somebody to defend his own people. And his law firm was more free of charge law firm in Kimberley.
At some point, he was restricted in terms of movement, in terms of entering courts, in terms of representing people and all that. But eventually, he was able to crack it and made it to the other side.
His last days, I met him his last days. That was in hospital. I think I'm very few who've met him before he died. And some books claim he was poisoned on the island. Other books claim he died of cancer. That gives us an idea. That could have been poisoning. But other books say no, he died of lung cancer.
Smoking, as well as probably the asbestosis. And of course the toxic mixture of him being a pipe smoker, probably smoking more during that isolation.
He died in 1978, age 54. And I can tell you, we were about 4 people and 2 elderly people at the Grootskade Hospital. After speaking a lot of things, and at the door he called us back. He said, "My young man, always remember, when you leave a person's company, make sure that you leave as a good friend." You know, that got stuck in my inner being. And up till today, no matter where I have a fight with, I always make sure when I leave your company, I leave as a good friend.